G'day legends, I hope that you are having a fantastic day and I hope that you are having a great start to your week. Now, as you'll be aware, I missed a couple of days. At the end of last week, I finished my 7th round of chemotherapy, and Friday through Sunday, well, I had a pretty rough time, but I'm feeling a lot better. So I hope that your weekend was maybe less eventful than mine, or at least good events taking place. Legends, of course, as always, we have a lot to go over. Because we have missed a few days, we have more than usual. So, of course, we'll look at the maps, we'll look at geolocations, but then we need to go a little bit further and say not only is that line moving, but what may be taken as we go, because we have seen an area that you and I have talked about before. And you may have heard me talk about the lithium deposit in Shevchenko. I spoke about this many, many months ago, back when we were looking at minerals, US mineral steals. Now, Russia is occupying that territory. Who owns it? Who has the rights to what's in the ground and what happens next? We'll talk about that today. We need to look as well at a number of aircraft that have been destroyed, damaged, new glide bombs entering the fold, and this huge problem that is becoming just the numerical value. That's how many of these cheap Garan drones that Russia is operating. Then we'll talk about priorities at the front line, the priorities on the battlefield from someone who is incredibly involved as well. So, of course, legends, we have a lot to go over, but what I want to look at first and just talk about was I was reading then this on Analysts, talking about then the difference in who is an analyst and advocates. And this is one of the things where the line has been very, very blurry, especially online during this war, is who are trying to be analysts or who are analysts and who are advocates, who are activists. And this is one of the biggest things that is annoying me is I see a lot of these analysts who are academics who, in their heart of hearts, know where something is going, but are not reporting on their own metrics in war because they're an advocate or they're an activist for a cause. Some of you may be aware of something I did around this, where someone was not prepared, fantastic speaker about how attritional war and this goes and writer, but is not willing to actually add those lessons onto this war. And we see this again and again, and people, I guess, posing as a bit of both, and that's where things get very skewed. And then this was fantastic, and you can go and read this if you would like. How can you tell the difference between an analyst and an advocate? It is all in the handling of data that runs counter to assertion. To an analyst, being wrong is disappointing, but it is primarily an opportunity to learn, an expected element in a feedback loop of continuous improvement. When knowledge is your only objective, there is no such thing as a bad fact, only one which you do not yet understand. Not so for the advocate. The advocate has tied their hopes and often their livelihoods to a specific outcome and feels compelled, whether consciously or not, to rationalise away or attack inconvenient realities. And this is where we see when you say to someone, oh, this is wrong, or I believe that is wrong, it's not taking it that you are criticising their analysis being wrong. Take it that you're criticising them as being wrong as a personal attack. It is advocacy when every perturbation in the weather is tagged as evidence of climate change. Each squiggle of unfavourable price action is declared market manipulation, and no act or utterance from a favoured politician is disqualifying. Few events blur the line between analysis and advocacy as thoroughly as war, especially for those with the strong personal or ideological ties to the combatants. The challenge is compounded by the relentless flood of propaganda from both sides, making it difficult to distinguish signal from noise. The rise of social media and the growing sophistication of artificial intelligence-generated images and videos only deepens the confusion, and people taking on a cause as their own, even if they're not really involved at all, allowing partisans to inhabit parallel realities. In such an environment, even attempting impartial analysis risks drawing from those fully invested in their chosen worldview. And that was fantastically written, and I will leave a link or something on the screen to go and read this if you would like. So, legends, let's start with some strikes and some drones, some planes, talk about all of this before we get into those minerals and maps. So today, we have seen an F-16 has gone down. The plane itself is worth what the plane is worth. The part that is then absolutely irreplaceable here and completely invaluable is, of course, the pilot. Sadly, the pilot, Lieutenant Colonel Maxim Ustimenko, has been killed as well. Now, the big loss in this is the pilot, not the plane. We say this every time these go down. Planes can be replaced. These pilots, well, the individual, the human, cannot be replaced. But as far as the job of which they are conducting takes multiple years to replace. And said that he was destroying aerial targets, and that's when the plane went down. And what we have seen is F-16s destroying drones in the air, and this is a very expensive way to then be destroying these aerial targets. This is due to a lack of ground-based air defences, but it's not going to get better. To be honest, the situation is looking like it's going to get worse and worse. Now, quick asterisk here, there are some pages saying that this plane was taken down by an air-to-air missile from a Russian plane. Again, I haven't seen any evidence of this yet, but there has been pages talking for some time about trapping some of these planes in the air. So knowing that when they fire missiles and drones, these planes will go up, and then things like Su-35 can go out and try and intercept. But what we do know is these drone attacks are getting massive. And we see, this is just from a Ukrainian account, Noel reports, that he's saying that there was 477 Garan Shahid type drones and decoys in the air, almost 500, which is a massive, massive amount. And we have had multiple days now that are nearing that 500. And what we know is there are Ukrainian pages saying that one of Russia's goals is to be well over 500. Some are saying near 1,000 of these a day. And that is going to overwhelm even the least sophisticated, most numerous air defences. And not only that, there's something that we've been speaking about with these Garans, is the Garans are now not only used long range, they're getting used shorter and shorter range, like in this geolocated footage here from the wrong side, 6Ks, 12Ks, 12Ks, because they're so numerous. They're being used to fire into cities, to fire at dual-use targets, to fire then at tactical targets on the front line. And AMK, he shares this one today of these coordinates, only 2 kilometres from the front line. And this is something you and I have been speaking about for some time, is as this number improves, you will see, as it grows greater, we will see more and more of these being used everywhere, because these are nowhere near as susceptible to electronic warfare or being downed by then ground fire as well, as some of these variants have improved. So keep an eye on all this. Of course, we have that F-16 going down, but it's not all rosy for fighter aircraft on the other side. Russia, they have had multiple aircraft losses. Now, we saw this, that the SBU, Special Operations Forces involved, have destroyed 4 Su-34 jets at the Marinovka airbase. Now, again, we're relying on some satellite imagery here as well, but it does appear, at least from this satellite imagery, that 2 have been destroyed and 2 have been damaged from then this image here. Funnily enough, in this footage, you can actually see that they are starting on this base to make these hangars. I know this is a brand new thing for the Russian Air Force, but obviously there was not enough. Now, it's a little bit foggy, of course it is, of what has actually occurred here, but it does look like maybe there was people swung by the Ukrainian intelligence services, some drones used. Again, we're not really sure, but we can see here that there is at least some damage that has been on 2 of them, and it does look like 2 more have been destroyed. And Fighter Bomber, as he always does, is incredibly cryptic in this, but given how it is, we can pull out that there's definitely been a lot of damage and destruction here. There's no point commenting on Marinovka, another round of multi-billion ruble losses that could and should have been prevented. And it wouldn't be a bad thing if not the only Ukrainians were held responsible for this. There are others who need to be dealt with. Otherwise, this will just keep happening. I'm sure our response will be a pile of angry and decisive Telegram messages, and pointing out that, yes, this keeps happening again and again. More aircraft are being lost on airfields than on operations for the Russians, or in friendly fire instances as well. And saying that it's not just the Ukrainians who are responsible for this, there's people in command who are as well. And many, many people are very disappointed in how the Russian Air Force, the VKS, is actually operating and has been throughout the entire war. That is one of the things I've said has been, people love to point at the failures in ground movements and army and etc. But I say, no, it would be the VKS has been hugely less powerful than we thought that they were, and this keeps happening. But what is actually changing, rather than some angry Telegram messages, and he writes this person and her boyfriend also happens to be a valuable foreign specialist, once again lost their shit over a Facebook post. I strongly urge every officer, patriot, citizen and just person to immediately report to the FSB because Russian citizens working for the enemy. Otherwise it turns into officers, patriots, citizens, clout chasers, forgive me Lord. So again, it's very, very cryptic in what is actually happening in this, but it does look like that intelligence services have operated maybe with some peoples and specialists on the ground. Again, we're not sure, but we do know some losses there. Some reports that UAC is rolling off a new batch of Su-34s as we speak. Again, wait out on that. I haven't seen their official page posted yet. Su-34s, as I've said, is the most important aircraft in this war. Absolutely. And most of that is because of the glide bombs. So we have this footage over Dnipro. And what this is the trail of an air defense missile that it had intercepted something. And we've come onto the map. Let's just have a look at where Dnipro is. And let's go, the closest front line is down here in the south. This is pretty rough. Here to here, you're talking 100 plus kilometers. You would think very safe from glide munitions. But we know there has been some new glide bombs coming in, because what did we see? Well, we saw Kharkiv get hit with glide bombs a couple of weeks back, as we spoke about. And we see this today by Ukrainska Pravda. Air Force comments on first ever Russian guided bomb attack on Dnipro. It's not the first ever use of this weapon, but the first one on Dnipro. The tactical aircraft, most likely a Su-34, has then launched one of these and going over 100 kilometer, a guided bomb. But what this is, this Grom 1, which is believed to be, this is a hybrid between a sort of cruise missile and a glide bomb, working on both. Flew over 100 kilometers and was shot down by air defenses. Again, very, very expensive interceptors for this, just like the Garans and other types. And this is the Grom 1 that we have seen then slung under the wings of planes, but also we have seen reports of being used in Kharkiv. And it is a hybrid. You can see the wings that pop out here, does then turn upside down, but does have some level of its own motor to assist in its glide to go further as well. So wait out on that, because we do know the cost per bang, I'll call it, that might be a term in Thailand, but cost per bang of glide munitions is very, very low, and they have been devastating all over the front line. Now, down in Crimea, now I can't tell if this is new footage or 2 weeks old, but we are getting this footage from FPVs destroying a number of S-400 TELs, and then the more important, see, this is the actual launcher here, but more important, radars as well down in Crimea. And one thing that we are seeing more and more and more of all over the front line, both Ukrainian and Russian, is longer range FPV. Now, there's plenty of ways to do this with repeaters or higher strength signaling, all of that, but we are seeing FPV style drones further and further away from then controlled lines. So let's have a look at then maps and minerals and talk about some very important stuff in this that really goes into then your politics too. Now, I wanted to start with this because I want to talk about how ridiculous this is from Mr. Lindsey Graham. And ridiculous and Lindsey Graham is synonymous at this point in time.
I want to ask you about Russia, because
many, many people are sharing this. This is why I'm actually displaying this. It's not just a piss take. Many people are sharing this or talking about this, going, huge sanctions inbound that are game-changing once again, and it won't be.
You're pushing this bill to impose severe new sanctions on Russia. Have you gotten Trump on board with
breakthrough here. So what does this bill do? If you're buying products from Russia and you're not helping Ukraine, then
so if you're buying product from Russia and you're not helping Ukraine,
there's a 500% tariff on your products coming to the United States.
It's a 500% tariff on your product coming into the United States. Okay, Mr. Graham. So this is secondary tariff. You were talking about secondary tariffs, which we've already explained, are risky and may not work. But the countries you're talking about is primarily China and India. And what I will say is 500% tariff. Well, we saw much, much lower tariffs and how that went. And again, I think that will fall apart there. Secondary tariffs is a huge breach of sovereign independence and financially of nations, and weaponization of economies, which moves countries away from dealing in then dominant forms of currency, but as well is going to have a huge impact back on the US. That China, of course, they're doing trade with Russia, then of course India is, but then we also need to go, well, what about these other states buying oil and gas and all that? Are we then going to step in and then tariff that too? So again, that's not game-changing like people are saying. There's no single action is game-changing. It's little by little, just actions everywhere. That's how tactics become strategy and how politics influences war and war influences politics. We need to talk about minerals. And again, there are trillions of dollars worth of minerals in Ukraine. Mr. Lindsey Graham, again, he has commented on these over, I think he said around $12 trillion worth of minerals before. How surprising. But what I want to talk about is down on what I'd refer to as the Velika Novosilka front. Then we come and we see Velika, and then we see Shevchenko. Now, what we see the other day, confirmed by Deep State Map, back on the 27th, is this movement through Shevchenko, Burlatsky, Vilny, Pole. Now, the reason this is important is the reason you and I have spoken about Shevchenko before, when the front line was way back here somewhere, was not what's on the ground, but what is beneath the ground. And if you do a quick Google search, the biggest lithium deposit in Ukraine, village of Shevchenko. Now, some say it is one of the largest. I've seen many other articles saying it is the largest here, with estimated, at least from my research, $3 to $100 billion worth of lithium. Now, I know that is an extreme range, but that's the range I'm seeing online. Now, interestingly, I actually went through some incredibly boring PDFs here about who actually then owns this. And it seems like it is this European lithium, at least has some of the rights to what is in the ground here. And I think they took a bit of a risk on, hey, we'll look at getting this maybe at bloody pennies on the dollar while there's still risk here, but it may not have worked out. But as well, we do know a lot of the US minerals deals and whatever, a lot of this is critical to this, like we see in some of these other articles from the New York Times. Russia seizes key lithium field, challenge for the US-Ukraine mineral deal, but it looks like it's owned by ASX, Australian stock market, European lithium. And we go down into page 8 on this, and they talk about the Shevchenko, the project in here as well, and then 20-year special permits for extraction and production of lithium here. So what I'm going to be monitoring over the next coming days, and if I forget, let me know, I'm going to monitor how this impacts on then the markets as well. So we see there's a lot of bits and pieces like this, and a lot of those critical minerals are now, well, a lot of them were behind the line anyway. The East has more of that than the West, but now coming under control as well. And that may have further pressure on Trump to settle this as well. So while we're in this area, let's talk about movements in this area. I showed you where things moved around here then the other day, and then we had further movements then the following day also. So let's just step back on this map. I'll show you what we have then been looking at. So let's go back to, sometimes it doesn't actually tell me the day. So we're back on the 26th. We see where Shevchenko moved, and then we'll step up to then the 27th. I believe I can turn this on. No real changes. Incorrect. Novosilka gets filled in. Vesely, Odradne. Finally, Odradne is shown in control, and movement in the direction of Zerka. Keep that in mind, turn that off, and then we'll move up to then today. No real changes shown on this one today. That's where I misspoke. But there are some significant shifts around here. So let's start up here, Yalta, Zerka. And what we can see is there's grey zone out of Zerka, but I believe that this is occupied. And of course, what this is this is where the border for Dnipropetrovsk Oblast is, and would be another axis of entry in this location as well. So we see 2 flags going up in Zirka. Small area likely has been occupied. But again, follows this paint by numbers of which you and I have spoken about. In this footage, we see getting hit by TOS multi-launch rockets, which is unsurprising. And then at 51 seconds, so let's go to here. There we go. We see geolocated of where some of these flags have gone up. I think I was a bit late on that. We see this is where that geolocation is Zirka, likely occupied. So let's have a look and see where this has moved for this whole sector for Syriac maps. So this is, again, this sector. Now, we look on the northern aspect of here, coming out near Zirka, as well as down around Zelny, Pole, Novopil. And what you can see is it doesn't show these like cut-ins down in here. It shows that all of this is like one solid piece all the way through to areas like Shevchenko, and then all the way up into areas as well, like Yalta. Then further movement, and this was then the occupation of Shevchenko. Further movement again around then this Zelny Pole area right in this sector as well, flattening this front up and therefore actually reducing the length of the front line. And then we come on to then the most recent map and the most interesting one of them. And let's zoom in on this. So this looks vastly different. So what we can see is we can see Yalta, Zirka, these areas up here, but the Russians are getting then to the borderline in here, as well as all the way through Ferovka, Komar, then taking these areas under control. You can see this dogleg in the road, that Odradne through to Zirka, that all of this has been taken all the way up to Pidibune as well. And once it's moved north, has then actually pushed then to the east, which is a very different direction typically than what we see fighting in here, and squeezing, creating a pincer from areas around Oleksivkia we saw moving a couple of weeks ago, and now squeezing into Dashne and areas in here as well. You can see Dashne is this red dot. So taking control all along the borderline in here. And what we may see, if this map is correct, is then a major shift into the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, as it does show as well, just in this sector, that the border is moving as well. And of course, this is linked in with the Pokrovsk sector, creating one now sort of bulge instead of individual bits and pieces, shortening the front line. Therefore, we can bring more weapons to bear in single areas. Now, we are going to go further over the maps, but I want to look at the frontline situation and talk about priorities. And this is from Mr. Bogdan Krotevich. Now, he was a lieutenant colonel and chief of staff for the defense of Mariupol in Azov. So let's look at what he has said here. And one thing I've spoken about many, many times is very similar to what he says here is the priority as well. And he says there can be no higher priority than the situation at the front, that at the end of the day, this is still a ground war. Yes, we see a ship sink or this or that, but at the end of the day, this war will be settled on the ground, and it appears that people want to bring your attention away from the front because it's not painting the picture which they would like we speak about the advocates in the beginning of this video, but want to move your attention away from there onto strategic or tactical actions in other areas rather than actually prioritize the front line. And then he speaks about that a lot of what people see as bravery of moving through line of contact and in artillery, that this isn't what we may interpret as bravery. He says, no, it's just exhaustion and indifference to one's own life. Now imagine, Ukraine is a soldier who has spent too long on the front line. The deaths of loved ones and friends have become routine. The deaths of children and civilians no longer evoke rage or even fear in most people, as they did at the beginning of the full-scale war. These feelings often vanish the very next day. And when there is no more emotional response, then lost territories, lack of reserves, and lack of rotations also become normal. So it's being normalised, these massive issues that have huge effect at the front, but it's not being prioritised. Senseless orders and heavy losses amongst soldiers become routine. yes, there are statistics on enemy losses. A points-based incentive system has even been introduced. This is causing a lot of issues too. This incentive system is a lot like, I guess, turning war into Call of Duty, that if you target this, you get that many points. You can then use that on like an online marketplace to buy then bits for your unit. The problem is some units have then nothing in some of the most important areas of the front, and some have lots. But it also means some of these drones are going after less important targets because they're not worth the points. It can have a double-edged sword. But how often are questions raised at headquarters about the losses of our own units? How often is it raised about the killed and wounded and missing in action rather than the propaganda statistics to win the misinformation war, disinformation war, online information war around just losses of the enemy? How often is it actually asked about what is this costing here for then news, he says, to advance 100 metres? What's asking? The entire country rejoices at least at something, but I feel pain because I know how much the unit paid for that command to advance. And anyone with even basic math skills understands this is just a temporary illusion. The number of people is shrinking. Collapse is only a matter of time. Now, many people have actually said, Willie, it doesn't look like your attritional warfare when I call bankruptcy theory. And what I've said is, well, it may not end up like that. But if it continues to if both countries continue fighting with no negotiation ever, eventually you will see collapse. So people go, well, it will just grind and grind and grind. Eventually, there will be a larger disparity and you will see that collapse. But typically, well, not typically, sometimes in war, there is then surrender before that complete fall off the cliff bankruptcy that I then speak about. And yes, this is war. Every soldier who has taken up arms is ready to give their life for Ukraine and its independence, but not for a general's chance to impress his superior. And every commander needs to understand by now, if there are no people around you who can tell you are wrong, then you are in a dangerous environment and one that will lead to fatal mistakes in decision making. I could not agree with that more. He speaks about then these units, that there's no rest, no rotation, in defence without fortifications, in assault without reserves. Officers no longer lead the charge. They drag those who are still standing. On a stretch of more than 5 kilometres, there are 10, maybe 12 soldiers. The defence is held by drivers, artillerymen and cooks. But even they are now used up, and only 25% of the battalion's original personnel remain, most of whom already gave their health earlier and serve as bathhouse attendants or drivers because they still want to contribute. And this is something that I've spoken about. This is where Russia has fully leant into the attritional way of waging war, because they know the more we attrit, yes, we're taking these losses from special forces and we're taking intelligence losses behind the line, but if we just keep attriting, there's just the prioritise at the front line, eventually these missions are going to become less as the front line needs to then be further prioritised. And this is why attritional warfare is so cruel, is because it kills so many. Resistance is completely gone too at points that then evolve through the war. When another battalion gets wiped out, we don't get reinforcements, we get redistribution. New people don't arrive, they get smeared across holes so numerous they can't even be counted. The enemy attacks several times a day. Motorcycle waves, armoured waves, assault groups made up of convicts. Our new arrivals get 5 days to adapt. On the 6th, they go to battle or into the ground. What I will say from the guys I speak to, a lot of these aren't convicts. These are guys who actually are motivated, who signed up to fight. I see this all the time about the conscripts versus reserves. And I say, if you were to go at the front line of Ukraine right now, who has more conscripts or conscripts or people that have volunteered? Volunteers, it's Ukraine who is dragging people forcefully off the street. Russia, yes, there's a huge incentive with money, but it is different to that. And just like that friend told me from the front line, he said, I saw a motorcycle attack, we mowed them down, but none of us had the motivation to do that. Also, maybe this was a ChatGPT translation error. I am unsure. Orders from above sound hysterical. Retake the position, which achieves nothing. Launch an assault across open ground for a kilometre, costing lives just to approach the line. Orders come directly from the top military official of the fictional Army. Sorry, I missed a part here. And on the new arrivals, get 5 days to adapt. On the 6th, they go to battle or into the ground. Reconnaissance, no time. Fire support, didn't arrive in time. FPV drones, not enough for one company. Those who should understand the situation better than us are afraid to look at it. Exactly what I spoke about against analysts and advocates. And I think there's command decisions made to fuel advocacy rather than real analysts, because the media and then social media bloggers, most are advocates. They refuse to acknowledge the obvious because because it's easier to find someone to blame within the brigade than to speak the truth upward. Even though there is only one person above, it's easy to report that the situation is under control or the commander of the fictional brigade is lying and hiding personnel than to admit that this control is an illusion propped up by shattered knees and crushing exhaustion, that death seems like an escape from this theatre of the absurd. Let's continue. We see how we're being squeezed. We see what will happen if we fall. Behind us are the fictional brigades already semi-encircled. We're holding on not for orders, not for the plan, but for those on our left and right, for the brigade that is still alive. So we're not holding the front. We're not holding this for orders. We're not holding it for some grand plan. We're holding it because if we go, those guys on our left and right, those in front behind us on our flanks, they're going to be in a world of hurt. Our commander, he's with us, but he's a hostage to orders from another world. A world where PowerPoint presentations matter more than evacuation. And now, hypothetical fictional questions. How many more fictional brigades need to be sacrificed before someone listens to the front instead of the polished generals? How many more lives must be lost before the top admits this is a partial shortfall? This isn't a partial shortfall, it's a systemic catastrophe. And this is that bankrupt it little by little, it's partial shortfall, then turns into a systemic catastrophe. Why are we on our knees begging for a Mavic drone? The ones taking orders from those who have everything except responsibility. Why are there more generals afraid of losing their position than afraid of losing their people? Who will answer for who will never return? Or again, no one. Do there need to be another tragedy before it's finally understood? This war is not won by reports, but by blood and truth. Analysis, advocacy, and where that can then move then not only command but political decisions too. And most importantly, will the state ever be able to look us in the eyes if we happen to come back? So lots raised there, and I appreciate that he has put that out. Now let's have a look over the remainder of the maps. Of course, we have Ukraine in the centre, capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. We have missed a couple of days, but I've got some screenshots of them. The red check that you'll see is ground that Russia had made over a 24-hour period. Now, it does look like Sumy has then stabilised, but keep an eye out because, yes, Sumy is stabilised, but then we're seeing more movement in the south. And this can be part of a much larger strategy to, well, we'll push down here, reserves will have to move, we had the numerically superior force, then we can afford to push on different axes, make a problem here, and then we'll get more movement up there. It is Brusilov Offensives 101. So let's talk, we're going to move up and down the maps, don't worry about it. Let's talk about Toretsk. Now, what we do know is we did see some geolocations around Delivkia a few weeks back, and today is no different. So let's have a look at this geolocation here. I actually did it a little bit short here, doesn't matter, but let's go 3.6 kilometers behind the line of control. What we see are these Russian forces raising a flag here, so confirmation that they are in Delivkia outside of the grey zone shown on this map here. Then let's just move slightly to the north of here and come into Chasiv Yar, where we see a bit of Ukrainian movement, a bit of Russian movement. So back on day 1120, so 2 days ago, we see some Russian advancement in the direction here of Stopochki. We know that their front line is further west for a fact than this is showing on the deep state. Also some movement through the main blocks, sort of Chasiv Yar actual up here, some of the remainder of these blocks, but also Ukrainian push back into some of these forest areas here, reaching some of the blocks as well. So just keep an eye on all of this happening around this sector for now. You'll get a better idea in the future. And then just to the north of here, we see the canal. The canal is always a good piece on the ground to base where things are moving off. We can see between Horovkia and Chasiv Yar, that this area all through here is supposedly filling in, and movement all the way up to then the canal, and that Ukraine pulled back across the canal, at least according to Syriac maps. Now, let's move up into then the north and talk about this a little bit further. So firstly, let's talk about Kupiansk. The island boys are still hanging out in there. That is incorrect. They will either not be there or it's red connected, showing that this map still shows it. I believe that Radkivkia and Kindrashivkia at this point will most likely be connected. Just to the south of here, but still the northeastern front, the Pashani front as we call it. And it does show, at least on this map, that there has been some movements through Kolesnikivkia, as well as down in the direction further out from Zarazove, more towards Bahuzlavska as well. So keep an eye on the expansion of this area. Of course, this is causing a big concern because this front in here is not exclusive from the Terney sector down in here. Of course, the only way to get into this whole region is through this gap between Rydkadab, or Karpivkia, apologies, Rydkadab is back here, Karpivkia and Lozove. And what I've said is I think Ukraine is desperate to launch counterattacks to try and push the Russians back in this sector, because they could make a catastrophic killing field in this area if the only way in and out gets effectively cut off by drones and artillery. So we see that movement up here shown by Syriac, but then let's go into here, into then the Terney sector, and we can see some of this appearing to happen. So just down to the south of here, we're in Kolodizani, Zeleny Dolnya, Kolodziazi. The Russia's making some ground. I'm not concerned about the north and the southern flanks. I've said Russia will try and fatten those, which does appear to be. I'm more concerned with this western extreme. And we can see Ukrainian army continue operations in Rydkadab, managed to recapture 40% of Rydkadab. And this is what I've said I believe we'll see, is more operations to try and push that western extreme back further. Then we see further operations in here. Ukrainian army re-entered the center of Rydkadab and recaptured in Karpivkia as well. So Karpivkia, Rydkadab, trying to launch more operations into here, and this is one of the areas I've said is critical, because this, like 12 kilometers between here, could just become a fatal funnel. Russia may not even look to close it up, because Ukraine's still going to have to feed vehicles and men and logistics up into Borova and out into these sectors. That this is going to be a huge problem. We can see, as I predicted, likely counters to try and push back that area around Rydkadab. Now, let's move further north. Let's move into Volchansk, of course, in the Kharkiv Oblast. Now, what we see here, and again, this is always difficult to know up in here just because everything is just catastrophically destroyed. North of Kharkiv, capture of the northern part of Volchansk during the second half of June. Russian army began operations on the other shore of the Vovcha. So if we then follow where the Vovcha River is running, that apparently just crossing into here, that Russia is now operating on this southern side. Again, wait out on that. I don't have any other maps showing this. Now, let's then move down into the south. Don't worry, we'll come back up into Pokrovsk. So today's map, the only change we see is to the east of Huliapol, Malanivka, that there is some movement confirmed by the Ukrainian ministry map here into the center of Malanivka. But from geolocations, we know there's been a little bit more around the south. So we have this map here, Huliapol, this is Huliapol, this is Malanivka, so we can confirm there was definitely movement in this direction. But it looks like Russia is using a lot more assets in the south, and this is what we have said for years, is if you are numerically superior on the front, you can just push in different axes. Sumi stalling out, move assets down here or move troops and start pushing. Just move on different. And what you want to do is keep your enemy running who's thinner and thin it out more and more. And then you might have success here. Then that will be stabilized because defenses will get moved here. And then you might have success more in the east or in the north. But let's go to the west of Kyiv, Kamianske. This should be one of the easiest areas to push back due to then the waterways running in here. I've spoken to a number of people specifically about this. We have this geolocation just on the south of Kamianske. We can see this Russian force here, this Russian soldier taking down a Ukrainian flag and then flying a Russian national flag on this road sign. So definite movement in this direction. We can confirm this by, is it this map? Yes, we can see the situation in here around Kamianske has been clarified and movement working off that geolocation that this is coming back under control. And then further, he shows movement across into Kamyanskoye and then out across to then the north of Lobkove. So this is Lobkove right down in here. This is Stepove. So this is Stepove right here, that it's saying all of this area in here is under control by the Russian forces, at least according to Suryak maps. Now, as I've said again and again, I believe we'll call this all of the Robotny-Orokhiv front, where the Ukrainian 2023 offensive was. This is the area, I think, that is the most hurtful to show any gains due to the cost of the 8 to 10 kilometres made in the failed 23 offensives. Now, let's have a look at this. This is Orokhiv. Malatot-Machka is right up in here. Managed to capture 30% of the locality. So again, wait out on this, but this is suggesting right up, let's go. So we have where this tree line curves. So the brick factory is right in here. That Suryak map, he's suggesting close enough to here, close enough to back here. There's been an advancement of about 6 kilometres in the direction of Orokhiv in the south. And maybe we'll see the south starting to move as more has been moved into the north. And this is the problem with thinning numbers. So then let's move into Pokrovsk. Now, as I say, we showed you the Velika front from Zerka all the way through to Komar, then Komar all the way to Zeleny Polny, that this is really flattening out in this. Oh, can I zoom? Sorry, I clicked the wrong one. This one. So this is like really flattening out to something more like this in here. And instead of being exclusive axes, it's becoming a singular axis that is impaired then with this other axis up here to its slight northeast. And then, of course, we have then a very large envelopment occurring in here, movement in Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, but also desaturating weapons used against then the Russian forces in this area of the front. Sursky has said that there's over 100,000 Russian forces in this direction at the moment. So let's have a look at what is moving in here. So again, not the easiest to see, but capture of Novosibirsk, so just where my cursor is at the moment. And then the next day, we have further exploitation further towards Udashne. So out in this sector, you can see this reservoir right here. So further movement to then the north, and then third day, some minor movements just to the direct south of Pokrovsk. Nothing too major on this, but still elements moving in here. But you still need to keep an eye on all of this. I think we're going to see large movement into Dnipropetrovsk Oblast on multiple axes over the next coming weeks. Then we have the east of Pokrovsk forming the axes of eastern Pokrovsk, but the western axis of Toretsk. And this is what everyone has been, well, not everyone, actually, no. This is what the real analysts, the people who care about the truth over then information that looks good in emotion, is you can see multiple areas such as this, such as here, that are going to meet to then exploit minor axis advances into large territorial advances, potentially very quickly. So, Pokrovsk East. Again, we see just minor movements out to the direction of Rosen Yar, nothing too major. Then we come Romanivka, Zoroya areas you'll be familiar with. We can have a look, see where this road bends, that it's right up in this direction and this reservoir here. So it's really flanking on Toretsk. And it does look like, if this map is correct, let's for a second say that this is correct. Let's say the Russians are up to here, near Katanivkia, and also, well, we know they're in Delivkia. Instead of fighting through Toretsk, just bypassing Toretsk and squeezing it, just due to the cost of actually taking an area like Toretsk, already been incredibly costly. And then we see this, and this is on today. So this is still the Pokrovsk eastern side, but on the western side of this, let's have a further look. And we can see, at least according to this map, major advancements shown by grey zone on this map. So this reservoir is right in here. So saying that this has come under control. Koptieve has come under control. Movement further from Moreliobivkia, Malanivkia, that further movements and really coming into the outskirts of areas of Minograd, Novu Kenomechny as well. Movements near Merne. So you can see this is becoming, it's becoming flattened from then Koptieve front all the way through to Moreliobivkia, trying to turn it from minor axes into just a straighter front line to bring more to bear on a point of pressure. So again, that is what my prediction over the next coming months is, that we're going to see. I know New York Times or Washington Post, someone today said that the Russian offensive already lost steam. In my opinion, no, we're seeing tactical movements that are going to be exploited into strategic gain. So we saw a tactical movement to Zirka. Maybe it looks like this, okay? But then we'll see a strategic gain of, from Zirka to Zelene Pole gets then flattened out, and we see a gain of all of this come under. And if you zoom out, it looks like this is happening from then Kupiansk to Pishani, from Pishani to Terny, from Terny through Siversk. Again, that's least likely. And then the Pokrovsk east, but Toretsk west. So the Toretsk encirclement or envelopment through to Kramatorsk, and then the Pokrovsk envelopment, and then I don't even know what to call this. We call it the Velika movement here. And I think a lot of this being distracted with thinning forces in then Kursk, in Sumy, and in the south. I don't think that Russia has a massive want to have large movements around Orokhiv or in Sumy. But what does it do? Well, it drags a lot of forces away, something which they would, yes, it thins out Russian forces because they have to go to Sumy and here, but that is not as important while you are still recruiting 30,000 people a month. Legends. I hope that you have a fantastic day. I hope we've caught up on everything. Look after yourselves, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.